Saints of the Americas is a series that seeks to share information on the life and times of the saints of the Catholic Church celebrated in the Americas. Your program hosts are Father Jim Corda and Father Jack Lavelle.
Welcome to our show. We're going to talk now about Saint Christopher Magallanes, and the saints that we're going to talk about in this particular show are all from Mexico. And so what's interesting, I think, in our conversation about these particular saints that we're going to focus on in our series today is that there's a culture that's extremely rich in many ways, in family and in faith. So before we actually talk about St. Christopher, let's talk a little bit about that.
Well, especially the time and the framework for his life in particular, but it would be so true. We're going to see that the ministry of the parish, the ministry of the church, is exactly what we would hope it would be in any society. It goes out beyond those four walls, not always in a direct preaching way, but in a sense of service and ministry to and with people. Mm-hmm. And so you're not just preaching in the church, but you're involved in education, you're involved in trade formation, mm-hmm. you're involved in how people are going to earn a living. And that really is part of that rich culture, and I think that is what gives the church its understanding, especially in Mexico, that it transcends just the parish. Mm-hmm. The parish really, we say in canon law that the pastor has responsibility for the souls in his territory, regardless of whether they're Catholic or not. In Mexico, we see this being lived out, mm-hmm. that the parish priest really takes responsibility for the community. And it's certainly lived out in a love of the people, but especially a love of the Blessed Mother.
And let's talk about his early life. We know that he entered the seminary at the age of 19, and following his ordination, he became a parish priest like most priests would become. Mm-hmm. But then his activities found him doing other things besides his day-to-day ministerials. What were some of those things that he involved himself with that really became something that was drawing the ire of people who were not of the faith? Mm-hmm.
Well, and as I mentioned, it became more than just the church, as you said. So we see him involved in parish life and in catechesis, but he gets involved in, an electrical plant to help run the mill, the newspaper of the time. So we could say that certainly the newspaper and what would be in that newspaper is going to raise the ire of the non-Catholic governmental officials. We see him in things like carpentry shops. So again, it was reaching out and working with and providing education and trade. So the two reasons why that becomes a problem, especially in very impoverished communities, when you have these governmental authorities that really want to keep the people oppressed. Mm-hmm. What's one of the things that keeps them oppressed? A lack of education mm-hmm. and a lack of money. So you educate people and you provide them with a trade to earn a living. Those are the two things that go directly contrary to how they're going to be able to keep those people oppressed and keep their rule over them.
And isn't that what the call of this saint is all about, is to lift people up out of that poverty, out of that illiteracy, and to a sense of dignity, really, among humanity. But it's interesting because as we talk a little bit more about him, we'll see that really as a young priest, he's kind of corralled with some of his other companions and put on trial. Mm-hmm. And so there's this young priest who has given his life, probably in a very short span of time, wholeheartedly, and then is really martyred. Not only for his faith, but because of his just desire to lift people up and exactly. to bring people forward. And it's interesting because he's beatified by John Paul II in 1992, which is really the year of the Jubilee of Mexico, and then he's canonized that same year. So there's that sense in this span of about 20 years that he's beatified and canonized, And what does that do for the Mexican people? What does that say to them that this person, this young priest, is elevated to sainthood?
Well, I think it goes back to one of the lines attributed to John Paul II. Certainly we know that in his, and it was a long pontificate, but certainly canonized so many saints. And the line attributed to him is he was asked why he was canonizing so many saints. And it was because we need them. And so certainly what John Paul sought to do in every culture and perhaps in almost every country, but with this particular saint, with Christopher in Mexico and others in Mexico who were canonized around that time, was to say to the people that this, not just his life, but this way of life is of value, to lift people up, to move them out of poverty, to find worth and value. And it's worth noting that one of the other reasons why they really were after him was he kept working at the formation of other priests. And whenever they'd shut one down, he'd open another one, and then even privately train them so that there would be people to pass on this teaching. And this teaching was rooted in the gospel message that all of God's creation is worth dignity and reverence and respect. So I think what John Paul was saying in elevating him and others was to remind people of that worth and dignity of all of God's people.
We've got about 2 minutes left of this particular segment, and I think another facet when we talk about martyrdom is those who have forgiven their persecutors, and that's really a tremendous witness for the saint because that really likens them to Jesus' suffering on the cross, who said, "Father, forgive them, they know not what they do." So there's that sense, even in his own martyrdom, and those who have been his companions in that martyrdom journey also have this tremendous sense of forgiveness for the persecutors. And you wonder if because of that forgiveness, that those who were persecuting them may have witnessed that, and maybe it sparked something in them. Maybe down the road there was a sense of conversion in their own heart, or a sense that what they have done was terribly wrong. And so in our final minute, what would you like to say to the folks that are with us about that particular sense?
Well, and again, it goes back to not only Jesus saying, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do," but we know that the response of at least one, the centurion, who, with all that happened that day and witnesses this, says, truly, this is the Son of God. And it brings a conversion. And I think that is true. I think there are people who are just waiting for representatives of the church. And I don't mean the Pope or bishops or even priests, but people who are living that life to be found a fraud. And if at that final moment, and the great line is, one does not seek martyrdom but welcomes it. You know, if then there's hostility or hatred or anger, it just proves the point. But that sense of forgiveness, that sense of being able to just surrender one's life over to Christ and to offer that forgiveness, that has to be the ultimate challenge. And how can someone turn away from that witness? And so certainly there's probably been many a conversion among those types of people who were forced into persecution of others or willingly went along, but then had to really question what it all meant.
Stay with us. We'll be back in a moment. The Society of St. Paul announces a new book on Padre Pio by Italian journalist Stefano Campanella. The director of Padre Pio Television gives readers an intimate insight into this saint who Pope Francis appointed as one of the great patrons of the Jubilee Year of Mercy. This edition can be found at St. Paul's Books and Gifts at 926 Boardman Poland Road, located across from the Olive Garden restaurant. This book on Padre Pio talks about his time in the sacrament of confession with countless of Catholic pilgrims, and as a contemplative saint whose life was blessed in countless ways. Visit St. Paul's Books and Gifts Monday through Saturday from 11 a.m. to 6:30 p.m. or call 330-953-2443 or email at stpaulsbookstore@gmail.com to learn more about Padre Pio and many other great saints of the Catholic Church.
There is a place where a total stranger will give you their blood. A place where someone you never knew will save your child from drowning. Where a person who doesn't look like you, talk like you, or dress like you will give you shelter after a flood. That place is called America, where we look out for each other. When you help the American Red Cross, you help America.
Welcome back to our show. Now we're going to talk about St. Juan Diego. I think many of us are very familiar with St. Juan Diego, and then subsequently we're going to talk about Our Lady of Guadalupe. But this other Mexican saint, what makes him so special to not only Mexico, but also to the saints of the Americas?
Well, I think even beyond the saints to the America, we see because of a deep and abiding love of the Blessed Mother in the Universal Church, specific apparitions of Mary have risen to a universal understanding and have captivated, the beauty of the Church and of its followers. And so we see in Fatima, in Lourdes, to a certain extent in Medjugorje, and certainly in Guadalupe, it is that connection with Our Lady that kind of exalts the roles of the people who are witnesses of those apparitions. So certainly the connection of Juan Diego to Our Lady of Guadalupe, who we'll talk about in our next segment more in depth. What makes Juan Diego unique, perhaps in those apparitions that I've mentioned, is he kind of jumps to the other end of the age spectrum. We know very well the story of Fatima and the three children and the secrets and all of the challenges that were brought to their young lives. We know the story of Bernadette Subaru, and being this young 13-year-old girl. But Juan Diego is an older gentleman. And so it kind of breaks that pattern of Mary appearing to these innocent children. But it perhaps was kind of fitting into the culture, of what Juan Diego would be able to witness to and what he would be able to bring. So it creates a unique pattern in the pattern, but it still follows that sense of Mary's revelation and how one then is called to go out and speak what they have seen and to invite others to this sense of belief.
It's interesting as we talk about this saint in particular, but those other saints in Marian apparitions, that what they experienced was really otherworldly. And them being able to relate that experience to everyday people, they would have said, well, I don't think that would ever happen. Or how can you actually see something like that? And we see obviously the same thing in Juan Diego's apparition and experience. And how does one relate that to people who are in authority, for example, to his own priest or his own bishop? We see different senses of people don't believe it. People don't understand it, and yet there's further signs that must happen. And isn't that oftentimes what people do is they want more proof, they want more signs, and in this apparition, they're given more signs. And so finally, there's an understanding that Our Lady truly has appeared in Our Lady of Guadalupe. And so let's talk a little bit more about Juan Diego, what his normal life would have been. He would have been someone who loved the church, who would have gone to Mass. And would that have been part of his culture?
Oh, very much so. Even though, there was a challenge to believing him. And the same is true for the others, whether it be Fatima or Lourdes. They were not the only Catholic in town and dealing with opposition, which makes it all the more, perhaps for us, a little more bizarre to hear in these stories that it was the church in these circumstances that challenged them. We know that it was the church that wanted the little girls and the little boy to recant in Fatima. It was the church that thought Bernadette to be a liar. So it is a challenge of that time. But his life would have been one of devotedness to the Eucharist, to Mary, and he would have had great companionship along that way. And perhaps the problem was, again, as you say, these were devout people, but how could this be? You know, they knew their circumstances. Who are we? You know, this is our life. We get up, we pray, we work, you know, we go to bed. We get up the next day, we pray, we work, we go to bed. And so you hate to use the word jealousy, but I think in all of these circumstances, there might have been a little, if there was this belief, there was jealousy. Well, why was it you? And why wasn't it me? And so that need of proof. But then again, it takes us back to, we've talked about the forgiveness of the martyrs, but it also takes us back to Jesus after the resurrection with Thomas. You know, the one needs proof, and yet what does Jesus say to Thomas after he provides him with that proof? Blessed are those who have not seen and believe. And so I think these different apparitions along the way, they're important, but there's still that constant reminder that perhaps there's that greater blessing for those who don't need the proof of each of those apparitions and believe that God can do this.
What's interesting too is on the part of the saint themselves, and in particular Saint Juan Diego, is that tremendous sense of humility. You know, he doesn't give up because he knows humbly that this actually is something that he's experienced. And so he doesn't in a violent way, but in a humble way, present these signs and these wonders, the continuance of this apparition to those who have the power to do something about it and to make it known. And so that whole sense of humble service is really part of this particular saint's life. We've got about 2 minutes left. In canonizing St. Juan Diego, John Paul II really lifted up this poor Indian peasant among the other people of the Americas. And in doing so, what was he trying to express to the people of this time?
Well, again, I think when these types of individuals are elevated by sainthood, it is a reminder to the people of those places, but also of those circumstances, that there is a great love of God and love from God showered upon them. And for all of us to work to not so much find a contentment in our circumstance of life to just stay there, but a contentment that blessings flow to everyone. You know, that you do not have to be a bishop, you don't have to be the head of a religious order, you don't have to be a king or a queen. We have saints that were kings and queens and princes and princesses, but you can be a peasant. You can be someone who, again, as I said, that daily toil of their lives still can be exalted by their faith in God.
We're going to take a break. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Available through St. Paul's Books and Gifts is a small treatise on peace of heart, both in book and audiobook form, by author Father Jacques Philippe, well-known preacher and retreatant from France. For more information on this item and many more, please visit the bookstore at 926 Boardman Canfield Road in Boardman, or call 330-953-2443, or visit their website at www.stpaulsusa.com. This book, Searching for and Maintaining Peace, is there to help you pursue peace of heart as a pure gift of God. Again, that phone number is 330-953-2443, or visit their website at www.stpaulsusa.com.
What have you done for your marriage today?
I gave my wife a hug this morning. I told her I love her. Instead of sitting on the couch, I hope to clean up.
I cooked my husband's favorite breakfast.
I sent my husband a love email.
What have I done for my marriage today? It's a good question.
I gave her a call and say thinking of her and the kids.
I did her hair this morning. I think it looks pretty good.
We're going to the museums as a family.
What have I done for my marriage today?
I made my wife coffee and breakfast this morning.
It's going to be her birthday next week, so I've been spending time today making arrangements to make that extra special.
Oh, we're spending the day together?
I bought her an orchid.
Hassan was able to let me sleep in by taking care of him in the morning.
I read the newspaper to my wife, and it cracked her up. She's still laughing.
What have you done for your marriage today? Small changes can make a world of difference. Get started at foryourmarriage.org, a message from the Catholic Church.
Welcome back to our show. Now we're going to talk about Our Lady of Guadalupe. This apparition is very rich, not only in for the eyes, but also rich in history. And in our previous segment, we talked about St. Juan Diego and his culture and his life and his faith. And we see this celebrated, obviously, in this feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe. Let's talk about some of the titles that Mary is given, in particular by popes because of this feast.
Well, we know that as we celebrate this, she's given titles such as the Virgin of Guadalupe because it reaffirms who she is. The Queen of Mexico, the Empress of the Americas. We now refer to this feast. This becomes the Feast of the Americas, uniting all of the Americas. I know, for us in the United States, too often people will say, well, we're American. Well, we're from the United States, but there's North America, there's South America, there's Central America. And so this is uniting this whole new world, if you will, and giving us this new and colorful and rich image of Mary to unite ourselves with.
It's interesting, as you were talking, I was trying to envision the poster or the painting or picture that we see of Our Lady of Guadalupe that is in the Basilica itself in Guadalupe, Mexico. And as pilgrims go there to commemorate this, they see this actual picture of Our Lady. And what's significant about her clothing that really talks to us about the culture itself?
Well, and again, it's an image of Mary that no one would ever expect. Again, we're used to, Mary in a blue robe or a white robe. We could get into a whole argument that Mary of Nazareth would have never wore any of these colors other than the color of the animal. She herself was in poverty. The blue is a makeover of the church in the 3rd and 4th century because she's the mother of a king. But those are the traditional colors. We get to Guadalupe, and it's a celebration and a unity with the culture, the colors and the flair and what that all represents, that each color represented something that they would have experienced and seen. Now, no different than paintings of other cultures. We could think of French Impressionistic paintings and other things that come out of Spain, but for the Mexico culture, it is. If we think of the Mexican culture even to this day, we think of bursts of color and all that's going on, and the image of Mary signifies that.
Mm-hmm. And let's talk about this particular sign that was part of her garment that really was something that Juan Diego presented to the bishop at the time as a further sign that this apparition actually took place, that he actually witnessed this. And we know that this took place in December, in the winter months, where these particular roses did not grow because of the climate and the temperature at the time. So let's talk about that sign and symbol. And signs and symbols are really important when we talk about faith and miracles.
Well, and certainly, and we know the story that, these roses, it's winter, it's snowing, they don't grow, and this, unfurling of this cloak, and that these roses are there, but then there's this image of Mary with all that full color imprinted there. One of the interesting things is that these signs of life that are used or generated throughout these different stories. And Juan Diego is not the only one to have the story of a flower, of a rose, being a sign of life or even a sign of God's presence among us. I think of the story, of saints who, were kind to the poor and were punished. And Elizabeth of Hungary comes to mind, where her husband did not want her ministering to the poor, and she would smuggle bread out of the castle, and she was told, the next time you do this, if you're caught, there's going to be a great, repercussion. And they catch her, and sure enough, she has the bread, but when her cloak is unfurled, the bread has become roses. But it's a sign of life, and it's a promise of life, and it's a promise of hope. And so I think we see that, in different times in the saints, but certainly for Juan Diego, it was an undisputable sign of God's presence. This life that would never have happened at that point, would never have grown, would never have existed, and there it is. And as fresh and as alive as if it was picked on a late spring day.
The other thing that I think we'd like to lift up in the last few minutes of our time together is a sense that this particular basilica of Our Lady of Guadalupe in Mexico is one of the most frequented Marian shrines around the globe. And that tells us a sense of who we are as Catholic people, that we are pilgrims. And many pilgrims go to visit not only that shrine of Our Lady of Guadalupe, but other Marian shrines and other celebrated sacred parts and churches and basilicas in the Catholic world. And why is being a pilgrim so important for us, not only as followers of the Lord, but also in understanding what our universal Catholic faith is all about?
Well, I think it's essential to who we are as a people, that it does signify that journey of faith. We've all done it. Whether it's in Guadalupe or in Lourdes or on a vacation in some remote town, if there's a church and usually when we go to them, they're of some significance or some beauty. We find ourselves in there. We find ourselves in there with non-Catholics. We find ourselves in there with people just looking at architecture. But I think for many of us who are Catholic, I think of how we sometimes make our way from all of the opulence to a little corner where there might be a shrine or a statue or an image of Our Lady, and we light a candle and we pray for our loved ones. And I think all of that is bringing us in connection with that journey. And we've talked before about being calculating. We don't sit down and say, I'm making the same journey that Juan Diego made. I'm making the same journey that the children at Fatima made. It's innate in us. It's that journey of faith. And it's illuminated by God's presence. It's as simple as praying before a statue, lighting a candle, saying the rosary. All of those things are beautiful traditions and customs and cultures that are leading us closer on that journey to heaven.
And we'd like to remind the folks that are with us that we celebrate Our Lady of Guadalupe on December 12th. St. Juan Diego's feast is on December 9th. And prior to that, the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, patroness of the United States, is celebrated on December 8th. Thank you for being with us. Have a good day, and God be with you.
Saints of the Americas was a production of CTNY, the Catholic Television Network of Youngstown. Your program hosts were Father Jim Corda and Father Jack Lavelle.